I'm Brian Hiatt. This is Rolling Stone Music Now. The album and the movie Purple Rain, double triumphs in the 80s by Prince, just celebrated their 40th anniversaries. It felt like the perfect time to take a deep dive into not only the making of that album and movie, but the long road up to it. Bobby Z was the drummer for The Revolution up until 1986, and he was also by Prince's side for the whole start of his career, even going back to before his first album, For You, from 1978. Bobby was kind enough to join me to trace the whole journey from 78 to 84, and it turned out to be a really revelatory conversation. Here's my interview with Bobby Z from The Revolution, looking back at his time with Prince. Bobby, as we were saying, you go back practically before anyone. You first met Prince, you were driving for him before you were drumming for him.
That's correct. I was working for Owen Husney, his first manager. I had grown up with Owen and my brother David playing in rock bands in the 60s. And Owen had an ad agency, and I was the driver of delivery, content, print media back in the day. And when he started to manage Prince, Prince would be in the office, and so it was just a natural thing to have him come with me instead of disrupt business all day in the office.
That was a very young Prince. What was he like at the very beginning there?
It was an extremely different character than we know immortalized today. He was definitely still not one of us, a mortal. He still had very king-like behaviors, even in his innocence. But he learned very quickly, actually. The fastest learner I've ever met, for obvious reasons. He could absorb things at a rate that was superhuman and absorb history and mix the future and the past together to make the present in a way that no other human being I've ever experienced could do.
So how did you make the transition? How did you end up playing with him?
We all gathered at this studio called Moon Sound, which studios back then were the old studios. You see the Beatles in the studio, and the guys are still wearing lab coats and stuff. Studios started to loosen up quite a bit with home audio, pro gear, pro home audio. 4-track machines similar to what the Beatles made, people could now buy, and then they decorate the rooms and turn them into funky spaces. And Chris Moon really had built several of these studios, and this was a very good one. And people would hang out there. He was a photographer. And so I was working with a band in the back in a rehearsal space that kind of worked out a deal with him. And I met him there, and before I started driving him. So I met him, watched him, met Andre, started to jam there, and we clicked on a lot of levels. So it was just comes down to one night, just comes down to one jam where you pick up the sticks and there you go. You hear about when Ringo played with the Beatles, and this one lights a fire under this one. I definitely was energized playing with Andre Simone and Prince Nelson at that. Andre Anderson and Prince Nelson at that time. Definitely. It was a moment in time. It was actually captured. It's a bootleg now, but it's labeled The Loring Sessions on YouTube, but it's not really. It was recorded at Sound 80 by my brother David. And it's me and Prince and Andre at the height of our jam. And you could easily find these on YouTube. And it's just absolutely amazing what we did. We were so inspired by Weather Report and Billy Cobham and School Days by Stanley Clarke and Gino Vanelli's Storm at Sunup. There was this funky fusion stuff going on that became super popular in the late 70s. We were imitating that or giving it our best go. And it's for young kids in our 19s and 20s. Prince was 18, and we were pretty good, and it's captured that moment. That was pre-talk of any band. There was no band, there was no deal, there was no anything. It was just hopes and dreams on Prince's back, and he definitely created an atmosphere that was magic, and the three of us became fast friends forever, too. It's interesting that my relationship with Andre and Prince is completely different than any of the other band members, because it has that core, and it was really an amazing time for the three of us as musicians. It was wonderful to be doing that. Every night we'd move the furniture out of Husney's office, and we'd jam all night and then put the furniture back a little bit haphazardly. People would see it the next day with amps sticking out, cords on the floor during a business day at the advertising agency. But we'd go till dawn, and then I'd go home and take a shower and go back to work and drive all day, and then we'd jam until dawn. Prince, right? That was the life you lived if you kept up with him. You sleep, who needs sleep?
You mentioned Billy Cobham. When I spoke to Prince years later, he was still talking about that great album, Spectrum.
Yeah, we definitely were students of the age. It was hit radio. There wasn't really much black radio here in Minneapolis. It was a kind of a low-watt community station, KMOJ, that Prince, they would play everything from Billie Holiday to Sly and the Family Stone, but KDWB and WDGY were competing top 40s and Grand Funk Railroad, and it really brought out what we were doing as far as rock and roll too. We loved that trio, we loved pop songs, but you also, Prince didn't like a lot of stuff. There was a lot of stuff to stay away from musically.
What didn't he like? That's a great thing to think about.
There was a lot of bubblegum at the time, and that was just hard for him to understand. But he got it quickly. It's all about the young teenagers, and that's what that was, and he became a teen idol himself. So it was just the musicianship, and we all know how Prince felt about musicianship. It's just, he expected a level from everybody, even hit records. He expected it to be up to his level.
I think even For You were around.
Before For You.
Yeah.
I mean, the demos, before they made the first demos of Sound 80, that my brother David came in and they did what I thought should have been the album, the first album. These demos were just fantastic, clean, just incredible sounds. David did Funky Town in the same studio, that huge hit with that. And so it made sense to me that the sound of Prince's demo tape would be on par with that, but the major label wanted to control it and try to get him on the West Coast, and it was a wrestling match a little bit to get that first album, but the compromise was to do it at the record plant in Sausalito, where he met a lot of people there, and it was a life-changing moment for him too. So every part of the journey in the beginning, For You, and then shedding his skin, so to speak, after the first album, a complete metamorphosis. The only person basically from the past were me and Andre at that point. Then he just cut off the past, went to Hollywood, did it the way he ended up with Cavallo Ruffalo making Purple Rain and all that. So there was a sever from the past after the first album that changed everything.
If I'm not mistaken, the first time you were credited for playing on one of his albums is on Controversy, and I think it's on the song Jack You Off.
You have to understand how the process worked, though. It was 8 hours, 10 hours of rehearsal. I'm listening to the tapes back. He did something in a sponge way that would grab from different ideas and then be a kind of a self-editing machine, and then be able to just transfer whatever just happened that he liked into the song he was working on. So he didn't really need anything, ever. It was proven his entire career. But he loved the ideas of other people, which would influence him. And then he would start to write based on your character. You know, this part, I want you to do this in a way. And you'd work on a live situation to make it happen. But he envisioned the band, not unlike like the Beach Boys or other people envision, even if they didn't play on it, you're still envisioned for the part on the record and the live show. So you were a part of the process all the time. Even the second album, when I just sat there as a heaven-sent helper, I'd play parts and tune drums and stuff, but he recorded drums first. So how do you know where you're at? He's just there's no click even back then, no count or anything. He's just on his own playing drum parts first. So it's pretty hard to play drums on a Prince track unless he's at the piano or guitar or something. You know what I mean?
Do you remember?
Did that. Drums first was one of the first things I saw him do, and it throws you because there's stops and starts and fills and stuff, and it's like, where is he? What is he doing? And then he'll pick up a bass and it matches perfectly, and a guitar matches perfectly to what he did. There's just nobody ever like him. It was just one of the few Stevie Wonder, other people that can do that. but I think he's probably the greatest that ever did it, being a solo musician, performer, producer, singer in the studio.
You were, of course, in his live band from the very beginning. Was it called the Rebels at some point? Was there a name before it was the Revolution?
The Rebels was like the first side project, was the first kind of inspiration before the time, and before he got frustrated with as we know, he got frustrated with the output schedule of a major label, which was marketing and printing the artwork and waiting and finding the holidays get in the way and this and that. He just wanted to have more outlets. And so we went to Mountaineer Studio in Colorado, and with the idea in mind that this band was the Rebels and it wasn't Prince's backup band, it was a different band, and he wasn't even sure what the pictures would be, if it would be us or not. He was conceptualizing already, and it was a pretty good session. I think some of those songs are actually pretty cool. There's some crazy ones. Andre and Dez contributed some. Dez had a song called Disco Away. Disco away and leave me alone. I just want to rock and roll. It was a very Kiss-like lyric, but it was a great rocker. Great rocker.
Those early tours, including opening for the Stones, legendarily, and, facing, I guess, a pretty hostile audience there.
Pretty hostile. That was like middle history. The Renaissance period of Prince was the Rolling Stones period. We were still in used clothing kind of suits. We were still at Recycled Tatters was the store we did. He's in his trench coat, leg warmer, bikini briefs idea, and I'm suit. Matt's fully the doctor. Lisa's in Dirty Mind mode, and Des, it was with the Japanese bonsai scarf on his head, was a warrior. And we were a fierce young band. It was Mark Brown's very first gig, and it just didn't go well. Falsetto, maybe, even though the band was fierce and loud, with Prince you had to understand there was a falsetto at times, which he started to use his full-throated voice in so many great ways. But in the beginning, he really didn't use it much. On the first album, it's like Just As Long As We're Together, he goes into the low voice for just a minute, but otherwise, Prince was falsetto for a long time. And so the falsetto in front of Stones fans, through them, that the get up, get him, and Prince is kind of an androgynous character. Guys look at his ass, and girls look at him, and he was a confusing kind of guy that made people that were drinking beer since 6 a.m. probably quite nervous at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Was he dispirited at all by that?
Was he disturbed?
Yeah, dispirited by the response.
Yeah, sure. Everybody's going to have failure, and everybody's going to have a beginning. We talked about the beginning. Let's talk about this. Was it a failure? Lisa Coleman has a great thought on all this, and she says that those are the people he needed to eventually win over to become Prince, the Purple Rain Prince. So he figured it out after that. He never took rejection as anything but work harder. And that's what he did. And then he comes back with a double album. And he goes, I get it. So I'll just give the R&B crowd, the disco crowd, 1999 over here with Party. And Party, he says, that's right, Party, that's right. He's making sure you understand that he's saying that as a throw to you over here. And then I'll give the rockers Little Red Corvette over here. And he was able to part the seas and come back together kind of thing with rock and roll and R&B. And then he started to bring people together of different musical genres. And that led to the power of 1999 and obviously the ability to at least imagine making a movie after that. He was always bolder than you could imagine. You get booed off the stage, and then I don't hear from him for a while, but I know one thing. I know that he's working. I know that he's not laying around moping at all about what happened. He is working and recording and practicing dance and practicing move and learning and absorbing and taking in film and music and TV, and he just gave it all back. And he gave it back in a way that we're talking about him today.
Leading up to Purple Rain, as you said, it was 1999. What do you remember about hearing that material? As you said, you could not have had Purple Rain without the monstrous success of 1999.
When he moved in on the Lake Riley house, we know it as the Purple House. And put the studio in the basement, and he found the sound. And that was the Minneapolis sound, I think, was born in that moment where he phones in on the synthesizer horn sound. And double entendre. He zones it on the horn sound. And the first thing I heard was, let's pretend we're married, where the horns are just crisp and blasting you. And I was just like, wow, this is another level. And he just was able to, on a really crappy drum set, he liked like broken cymbals and small, like a 16-inch kick. And it didn't matter. It was easy to play the set, but he could manipulate the sound of it in so many different ways on top of the Linn, which is the thing you don't realize is that, yes, he was a master, but that became my job, was to decipher all this percussion that he's doing, even if he's mixing it down. He had an ability to mix things in different areas of your head that you didn't even realize were happening. And you would in rehearsal, you'd say, he goes, there's a part there, and you go, what? But he wanted to hear that louder sometimes in a live setting, and he would bury stuff in recording. And by the time we started to put the synth on, Little Red Corvette, which is the do, do. And those Pearl Syncussions became part 2 of the drumming arsenal because they were drum synthesizers that had sweeps. So you could sweep faders up and down and make bombs or make those toms that are just kind of meaty electronic like nothing else. It gives you that real feeling. Sexuality is really where those are highlighted to the fullest, where they're just, the whole rhythm is like a paradiddle on top of that. Stand up, everybody. This is your life. Let me take you to another world. Let me take you to And there was just so much going on in that period. The time, Vanity 6, the output in that period of time was just insane. He would ask you for songs and pieces of songs, and people would bring him stuff. Des wrote lyrics for Cool. I don't know if people really realize that, but there was so much synergy. You rehearse all day, and then he'd say, who's got this or that? I mean, it was just, it was like, go have a dinner break and bring your idea, or not, or watch him. Which was still one of my favorite things to do in life. I would just hang out and watch him. Kind of like Ringo watching McCartney in documentary, the Peter Jackson documentary. It was me. I just sat. Nothing was more entertaining. Who could play better than that? Where could I go? What show could I see that would be better than watching him record? And then having him say, go out here with this cowbell and hit this on the 3. You just wanted to be around it. That time was very exciting. Vanity was a very incredible person. Denise was incredible. And she was not a pushover by any means. She had her apartment downtown, and she was fierce and creative, and a lot of the vibe that permeated in Purple Rain with the masks and the kind of the 80s kind of style of Art Deco-y, but New Orleans style, was her. She brought a lot to the table. And I just like to remind people there was a lot of influence. She was definitely one. She was a good friend. She was a gang leader on her own. She had us Pied Piper too in creative ways. And those two together were incredible. That period of time going on the road with that thing, with the time at Vanity 6 was just really probably one of the highlights for him, to see all these creations and all this stuff. There was a lot of employees to handle, if you know what I'm saying. It's like everybody deals with their boss or an employee, and those are never always fun. It's hard to keep all these people happy, dragging from city to city, but that period of time was really a lot of fun. All the buses and all the mayhem at truck stops, and it was just pretty primitive stuff, but we were definitely kicking some butt.
What was he doing as far as, I've always thought he's one of the greatest, in addition to all the instruments he plays so spectacularly, he's one of the greatest drum programmers of all time. What did you feel that he was doing as far as programming drum machines that felt unique to you at that point?
Well, the thing about the Linn was everything was new. So it was all happening then. So there was early drum machines, like the Wurlitzer had kind of a version of the 808 with the Lowry organ that I had seen at my uncle's house, when I was a kid. So there was beat boxes, and Casio had little drum thing. So there was that stuff, and very fascinating to me. And the two things about the Lin is the buttons, which were very set up as touch sensitive. And you could really, if you touched it, and you get the sound you wanted. So he could, in real time, do fills with his fingers. He's letting the beat go. And most of us would go, well, we got to learn something. But there was very little learning with him. It was all spontaneous. So he could, on the kick drum or the tom or the snare, in, like everything, perfect time, he would just add bits or little finger twirlers or some sort of part that had him ad-libbing different parts. He would go through a straight beat, go through the song, maybe add 3 or 4 different extra kick drums, but they were placed perfectly. You just perfectly. And that was just absolutely incredible. The other thing is two things. There was individual outs. The genius of the Lin, there was individual outs for every input. So the snare, the kick, the hi-hat, the toms, the clave, the tambourine, they all had individual outs, and you could tune that. So he, in his unorthodox, untraditional ways, would take that clave and tune it all the way down. So a clave is like click, right? But if you tune it all the way down, it's like a Let's Go Crazy. He's taking that thing, he's putting it loud in the mix. And then on top of that, he's having me play cymbals and the pearl syncussions. So he's trying to get away from traditional drums. His goal was then you're going to play this. And it's, what do you mean? There's no pads. Simmons had now come out with pads, but Lin had no pads. So he put it on this genius tech we had, Don Batts, who was very instrumental in teaching Prince about the guitar pedals, which he mastered so well, and in tandem and parallel, they call it electronically. He could put pedal up to pedal and make these amazing guitar sounds his whole career. But Don was tasked with making an interface from the Lin to the pad. So we used Simmons pads through the interface with microphones that were used on acoustic guitar back then, and into the drums, and had a trigger. Now, this became a contraption, if you will, in the beginning that maybe worked and maybe didn't work, or misfired or double fired. And again, with Prince, there was no excuses. It was your fault if an act of God happened with the machine. It was just very nerve-wracking, but that kind of pressure, which he put on people to get things done, created a very amazing, playable, at least not finesse playable. You're not going to do Buddy Richfield's on the thing, but by the time we got to the American Music Awards, I could pull Purple Rain off pretty cool with it, with the snare triggering the Lin. And so it got better and better. By the time we got to Parade, we had custom pads that were diamond-shaped with paisley coverings, and that could be easily struck and dynamics played and everything, the pads. But Prince was innovative in the Lin in so many ways, and the electronic drums in so many ways, pushing the early envelope with that too. The end of the Controversy tour, he looked at me and we were going out, and he said, next album, people are going to think you're God up there because the thunder and lightning that's going to come. So it was pretty amazing to see his creations on music levels, technology-wise, as well as the parts that we were playing.
You were at the absolute cutting edge in the world with this stuff. The first person, the only person triggering Lin parts live on stage. There must have been nights when it was a full disaster technologically.
Yeah, and then there was the James Brown aspect to it all, where you have to start and stop the contraption, waiting for good God, and then come back in. So there was just no mercy. The guy, not only he was not sympathetic to your battles with technology, he was testing the boundaries of musicianship and being a band leader on top of the tech. So it takes it all up in kind of mathematics, the trigonometry of the ability to control the music in a live band in a large room. It just becomes unbelievable power, which he obviously created in a live setting because of the energy he could create with all this mayhem.
Yeah, and it also meant, because the drums can be such a driver of the sound, it also meant that you guys were on stage sounding more modern than anyone else because you were doing something that didn't exist.
Yeah, we were doing stuff that didn't exist. And that was Prince had a machete out for the first 6 albums. Around the World a Day and Parade started to become more experimental. But the mission from For You to Purple Rain was all of what we just talked about. This ability to just manipulate the atoms and atmosphere of music and people and personality and press and mystique. It was a magical time that you still didn't have to talk to anyone. There was no social media. His mystique was to not talk, which is doubt there's an artist today that doesn't want to be seen constantly. Whereas back then, he wanted to be seen, unseen, and seeing a glimpse of him was like seeing 50 million followers. Just a picture of him just was so rare, and that created such power as well.
One of the things that people talk about when they try to put Purple Rain in context is 1984 was obviously the year after Michael Jackson's incredible success with Thriller began, and that Prince was always eyeing that. To what extent was that ever something that you were personally aware of at the time?
That's a great story, because we were at Sunset Sound, he's finishing Purple Rain, and the album, working on the album, we just left up until the movie was over. That's how the Beautiful Ones was created overnight, because it was just left up. I'm going to sleep, and then the next day, here's the Beautiful One. You miss one day, and there you go. But we were at his house on Maple, I believe, and we're watching the Grammys. My wife and I are there, and we're watching the Grammys. And after the Grammys, Michael wins those 7 Grammys, and he's on TV, and Prince looks at us and goes, next year, that's going to be us. And it's, okay, the album's not done and the movie's not done, and you're just, yay team. Yeah, we're going to win the Super Bowl next year. And he says, you guys want to watch the movie? And we're like, yeah. So we watch it, and it's not finished at all. It's 3 hours. It's uncut, and we were just like, it was cool looking and everything, but when you're dealing with 3 hours of uncut film, you tend to just wonder what's going on a little bit. It just was all a moment in time, but he was aiming for that. Thriller, certainly, we can't overlook the 2 steps that got to Purple Rain, which is Prince and Michael being acceptable black artists on MTV. All of a sudden, they had to cave with 2 of the greatest of all time, but not too bad. Corvette's on, and 1999's on. All of a sudden, Thriller comes on. Billie Jean's on. Thriller comes on. And Thriller's like lighting the world on fire, right? It's not a video. It's a mini movie. And that kind of throw that gas on Prince's fire already. Well, mini movie, this is mine. I'm taking this now. That's not acceptable that someone else has it. I'm going to make the full movie. It's got to be a motion picture. And was it all to compete? It wasn't just Michael. It was everyone. It was absolutely everyone. He was the Muhammad Ali of rock and roll. It was rope-a-dope and everything. It was, everyone was game to be handled, and he did it. Motion picture. MTV focuses a whole night to the motion picture, the premiere. He acts too, right? So here we go. Now he's 3-dimensional because he is now starring in this movie. He's got the #1 album. He's got the #1 song. It was an achievement. Did he feel like he finally got Michael? I don't think it ever. I don't know. You just never know what was going on. They had great songs and great hits, and Michael and Prince gave us some of the best music that lives, and that I was just grateful to just be a part of it and that close to it.
What was the first, so really Purple Rain started during or just after the 1999 tour? He was already going on it. What was the first glimmer that you heard of those songs, that album, that movie, that project?
There started to be some observers and writers. William Blinn, who was credited for one of the first versions of the film, was on the bus, and he would observe us and observe Prince and try to build character and Prince was very adamant that we were going to be the actors, and he wanted us to be real characters, and so he wanted the writers to study us, and so they knew our personalities, which is genius actually, to create a role and dialogue that matches who you are. And so there was writers, and there was more talk, and we were always doing doing sometimes goofy skits anyway. We ended up, because of the extra time, had dancing class in the summer leading up to Purple Rain in Minneapolis, dance class and acting class. And acting class was very interesting. It was a serious acting class. And there would be scenarios where you'd get a scene like Chicken. Prince and I were in an airplane, and we just naturally put our chairs back. We were taking off. Things to create spontaneity. And it was really fascinating to develop this thing. So it started from very, like, we're going to make a movie. Are you okay? Kind of thing. Are we going off the cliff now? But he gave you such fierce confidence that there was really never any doubt or room for doubt that it would fail. Once you got into it, you started filming it, it was like the most exciting thing in the world. And failure wasn't even, we're making a movie. It really became a reality. And it was a fairy tale after that. I'm glad it didn't go the other way.
There were moments when I guess you guys were rehearsing, and then in the next room, the time was rehearsing. It was like this frenzy of preparation for the movie and album, it seems.
Yeah. Like I said, even in the earliest of days, sleep, what sleep? There was just so much excitement going on with the ability to generate all this music and transfer it to all these musicians and really expect best out of everyone. And even that wasn't good enough. And we're all striving for something that was beyond perfection. It was incredible, the work ethic he had to finish rehearsing with us and then go rehearse the time and then the set with Vanity 6 and then go record and then repeat the whole thing the next day. And you could tell that he would go without sleep, and you could tell, you kind of, as a caretaker I was from the very earliest days, I was like, hey, just something to eat? You want some tea? He was working himself to the bone, as they say, and it just was pouring out of him. And it was so amazingly brilliant that you just hung on. Wendy says it's a comet. The guy was a comet. And it's very true that you're just hanging on, and that's all you could do.
What were the first songs that you became aware of from what became Purple Rain?
We were always playing alternative sets. So you'd have the set that you were going to do the show of, and then there could be one or two alternative sets, 7 songs, 10 songs. You could know all the time songs in advance. The band could play the family songs in advance, the Sheila songs in advance. We were just muses for all of these ideas before we'd finally, at the end of the day, run through the set for the show that was coming up that we had been doing for months. So it started with, I think, when we set back up in the warehouse in St. Louis Park, that is when we started to really fix Let's Go Crazy was one of the first things where it was just very, you could tell it was very, he wanted the band input much more in this album. And it was set up a stage with a 2-inch machine, very unorthodox again, board, 2-inch in the middle of the room. No glass or any of that stuff, or walls. Who needs walls, right? And wires everywhere. But that gave it a sound because all these drum stations, these electronic with pedals and all this stuff were permanent. His guitar setup was permanent. Wendy and Matt and Lisa and Mark could have their setups, and the sounds were perfected. And that moment was Let's Go Crazy, and eventually The Rough of Purple Rain. That came out of that environment. Taking that to First Avenue then gave the live recordings of some of these songs. But the energy that was put into Let's Go Crazy, I could tell, was definitely thematic and exciting. This was definitely different with its counter rhythms and keyboard forays into big kind of sweeps, orchestral. It just had a real theme to it.
So on August 3rd, I think, 1983, was that First Avenue benefit show, which was recorded and ended up providing the basic tracks, at least, for multiple songs on Purple Rain. But I don't think you guys had any idea that you might be recording some of the album there, basically.
He brought in to get a mobile truck like that in Minneapolis, the record plant's mobile truck. And again, he had my brother David at the helm because he knew he would get it on tape right. So it was a fantastic machine, and David really knew the sound of the band. He had been recording with Prince all these years, and now we are here 6 albums later, technically 7 if you count the demos. But he was telling us, we're making history tonight. I mean, I've seen him fired up before shows hundreds of times, but this particular night he was very fired up. I mean, we're making history. The crowd didn't react to Purple Rain and I Would Die For You, and Baby I'm a Star, they didn't certainly have the reaction they get now. But to him, he really didn't care. He just thought that these were going down etched in stone for history. He was right. He had said that before, but he was. We were cutting some real serious, even if some of the parts that from live didn't actually make it, the energy of all that is there. Purple Rain is, of course, especially true because it captures a moment in time. At least for me as a drummer, it's 100 degrees in there. The humidity's 100. Cigarette smoke back then. Everybody was smoking cigarettes in 100 humidity. It was just drenched with a club air and a hot August night. And it just permeates from the song to this day. The song is still alive to me. It never really, whenever you hear Purple Rain, you hear something different. There's just something about it that just moves you in this bar. You found that you didn't move you in this bar. And it seems like everyone that hears it does the same thing. They quiet down like it's a prayer and they listen intently to this song, and the solo brings them a crescendo in their life as well as that moment they're listening to it. And it's just amazing when you think about that song. That down-tempo song is the climax of an Oscar-winning score. And it's hard to do, to take a song and make it as powerful, but obviously Prince playing guitar was the cherry on top. And he did it live, and it's pretty much intact. His solo, if you see the long version of it floating around up there, it was editing, and Sunset Sound gave it a great mix, but it lives on.
What do you remember about the evolution of that song? I know Lisa has said that she remembers an early version that wasn't as anthemic, that was almost country, and that he possibly even tried to give it to Stevie Nicks first, but she felt intimidated by it. Do you remember? Were you aware of all that?
He brought it to the band eventually when he wrote, as we know now, there was always several versions of Prince song. There was the original, and then a second one, sometimes the third one, and then the final one, and then we found out the final one was he wrote in the 80s or the 70s. The guy was his own computer file of his own songs. So he brought Purple Rain on the piano to the band, and I think he had enough confidence at that point. I know that he thought it might have been like Journey. We were on tour and Bob Seger was on tour, and we'd sometimes get to the city the night early, and Bob Seger would fill arenas with that kind of good old rock and roll, but some really heavy ballads like Turn the Page and stuff like that. He was always fascinated by that a rock ballad could do that to people. And I think that inspired it, and I think he felt comfortable to bring it to the band after he probably second-guessed it with, I think, Jonathan Cain and Stevie Nicks. I think there's other people he felt that because of the chord progression. But I think Wendy changed that when she played those guitar chords. I think Wendy did something like the biggest opening guitar chord since A Hard Day's Night. I think, when the Beatles hit that opening chord, I think she does the same thing with Purple Rain. When you hear that opening chord, this is something different. So I think she gave it a color that surprised him and delighted him and set us all off to just feel this in a way that was gospel-y and dirge-like in a way. It trudges and it moves in a way. So it is a country song, and it is a gospel song, and it is an inspirational song, and it is a Prince song, most definitely. The lyrics are, let me guide you to the Purple Rain. It's a Prince song. He's saying, let me guide you. We're all following Prince in that song.
How much were you hanging around for the time stuff? Because somewhere around here, supposedly, and I have a hard time picturing this, I think there was a lot of tension between Morris and Prince, and supposedly they got in an actual fist fight, which I just cannot picture.
Well, Morris and Prince go back to school. So think about people you went to school with,
right.
Grade school or junior high, how squirrely all that was. I can't imagine what the motions that Morris and Prince went through. All of a sudden, Morris wanted to be his drummer. Prince had other plans. They brought him back, and Morris ended up coming on tour filming us. Was the beginning of his kind of return to Prince's world. And then they started playing again, and one thing led to another, and the time was born. And there was tension all the way. I'll save it for another day, but there was a food fight that was pretty spectacular. at the end of the controversy tour. So there was tension. Making a movie, when they stick that camera in your face, it's a different world. I'm sure just the pressure of making the movie, the doubt, the indie kind of nature of it caused a lot of strain. And I will let Morris speak for Morris, but I understand if you grow up like that and there was disappointments along the way, that it's not a perfect world.
What stands out in your memory from the actual filming of the movie?
The only thing I had to compare it to was the Beatles movies. There was nothing. Help was the last thing I can remember, but there was some really heavy inspiration in Quadrophenia that we studied. And Sting was in that movie, and Prince and I would watch Quadrophenia all the time. And that was another heavy influence, the authenticity of that movie, and the Who kind of stepping back and not really even being in it at all, but creating these real life scenarios of mods and rockers is easy to West Side Story the thing into the Revolution and the Time. Battle of the Bands, that's all it really is. And the filming of the songs, we rehearsed lip sync, pretty good lip sync. We should have won an Oscar for that, for performances of the songs in the film. That was a lot of fun. Being able to just, after making those videos, you really learned how to act in the video of the song, so to speak, in this case, a movie. Once we got that and we were locked in that, you always waited for your big moment. So you're going to say your line. Each band member had a few lines, and this was going to be your moment in the sun, right? So we shoot the dressing room scene, I think December 23rd, that right up to the holidays where that it feels like you're going to turn into a pumpkin, or right into that moment where it's just the world seems like it's shutting down, and we're shooting this scene. I finally get to my big moment, what difference does it make, and all that stuff. And if you listen to it closely, I drag the chair, and it's louder than anything else in the movie. I just get up, and you hear this metal chair on the floor. It's like scraped across the floor, and I always find that quite funny. It's funny that the little things that bother you. The other thing was it was 200 below zero with a wind chill of minus 400 below zero. It was Minneapolis in January, and the trucks were freezing. The Hollywood guys were dying in the weather. It was just brutally cold. 4:30 calls in temperatures sub-zero Antarctica stuff. So it was a challenge. We started in the fall. It was quite nice in the motorcycle scenes and some of the outdoor stuff. But they had to finish in LA. Some of the pickup shots are in LA because it just became too winter in the north.
The mention of Quadrophenia made me realize something that I'm not sure anyone's ever put together, which is he probably got the idea for the motorcycle and the look of the motorcycle from the scooters in Quadrophenia.
What can I say? The guy was the greatest sponge in the history of the world.
But I guess you must have realized that long ago.
There are many things that Easter eggs along the way I could leave. You just put that together. Obviously, there was other films too. We would watch Rebel Without a Cause. There was other motorcycle stuff. Al Magnoli actually had made a motorcycle film before Purple Rain, I believe. The motorcycle came hand in hand was to get him on a motorcycle, I think, had many fathers. I think there was just destiny on that. But sure, Quadrophenia, like I said, the mod and the rockers too. Yes. The ability to create rival gangs. And we were definitely in a gang. Prince believed in gangship. The Time was in a gang. He created Frankenstein, right? Now Frankenstein monsters living over here as the Time, and he creates a rivalry within himself, right? Because he's writing all their music and making all their records. So he was that complicated, and we were all just mere mortals back on Earth here, and he's playing with songs, hit songs, creating entities with hit songs, giving hit songs away. This is just pretty much rarefied air for Prince, right?
And then that tour in real life was probably the most Beatles-like moment that you experienced.
Crowd was deafening. By the time you got to the band coming in, Doctor, everything will be all right. Boom, God, boom, God. By the time you got to that, you couldn't hear. You couldn't hear the music. The crowd overpowered the first half of Let's Go Crazy. And it was unlike the Beatles, we had monitors. I don't know how the Beatles did it with people, the primitive PAs of the 60s, but we had monitors and we stayed with it. I wish I had inner ear monitors back then. I think that would have made life a lot easier like they have now, but we had volume. Prince could take a lot of volume, and he had two side fills. He didn't like the wedges in front, so the two side fills were pretty dynamic and would come at you pretty strong. So it was definitely volume was the answer to overcoming the crowd. But it in those giant rooms with crowds like that, sometimes I still hear it in my head when I put my head on the pillow.
I think there's a medical term for that.
It's called deafness.
But when you talk about the level of this output, I was looking at the chronology. He laid down the demo for Manic Monday before Purple Rain was even finished. That song, if he wanted, could have been on Purple Rain.
The whole Around the World in a Day album was done. And I believe the Family album was done before we played our first note in Detroit for the Purple Rain tour. He was already moving on. You could tell he wanted to become the character for Around the World in a Day, which we saw in Raspberry Beret. He wanted to morph into that guy faster than people wanted him to, because he could have toured for another 2 years with the thing, but he released Around the World in a Day. He wanted to move on. So that's how he rolled. That's how he operated.
And he, I think, had a sense early on that the success of Purple Rain was as much of a curse as a blessing. People quote him as saying that, oh man, I'm never good. This is almost too much of a peak. When the movie hit and the album hit and the singles hit, I think he became aware it was going to be something that was going to chase him the rest of his career.
You just said what you just said. It's how can any human being go through all that? The way he handled pressure was just another hit. That's who he became. He's the star's star because he had the ability to do those things you just said. If he would come into a room, it was stop a clock. And it was just a unique talent that he had that just undescribable. And that's why we're still talking about it, because it was just such a unique person in history that it's just hard to really talk about it in normal terms. The ability to do everything you just said. Throwing away, not Manic Monday could have been, but at the same time, he would test. He gave it to David Kahn, and David Kahn messed with it, and he loved it. If he didn't like what the Bangles did, it could have ended up on some other album, right? He was just flowing with music and giving it and trying it in so many different ways that it just was a magic.
Do you feel like the Revolution, and then by extension, your own gig as drummer, did it feel like at the time, oh, this could go on another 10 years, another 20 years, or did you have a sense that the clock was always ticking?
I had a sense the clock was always ticking because I had started from ground zero, and he was a solo artist, really. This thing he just had created with all these people and all the stuff, and he became really close to the members of the Revolution, and everything was just peaking, and Nice was a difficult time for everyone, I think. And luckily we had the Parade tour to leave our mark, because I think that was some of the best shows and fun that we had, just letting it go, less drum machine, more playable drums. Like I said, those diamond drums earlier. It was just really great arrangements. The horns were fun. Songs like Mountains came out of that. And Girls and Boys was fun. It was just a lot of the opening of the show with Around the World in a Day and Christopher Tracy's Parade. These were dynamic performances that really satisfied me. And then Sheila wanted my job. It was pretty obvious for me. Maybe not everybody else. Everybody's going to have their own story. But it was pretty obvious that Sheila wanted the job, and he wanted Sheila to have the job. And they had my blessing. I was 12 years into the campaign at that point, and went from zero to hero. I was fine. We were good, and we remained friends, and he was very close with my wife and family and all of the Rivkin family for our entire lives, and just lucky to have him in our lives. But you can tell when a band, you've seen enough documentaries to know that band documentaries, that this happens and that happens and this happens and that this guy does that. We had our share of that too, and when you live together and that kind of pressure, stuff happens. I think we had an amazing run. I'm really grateful. Wendy finally came in at the right time and gave us a unity we probably never had. If you look back at it, Andre and Des were not committed. They were ready to go do their own thing when the band was formed. They make no bones about it. That was just the deal that was struck. And I think with Wendy, we had somebody that was willing to be a lifer, obviously, and that's why we're still playing today under what we call the movie band. The five of us that really just love each other and love this music.
So obviously Alex Edelman made what sounds like a very extensive 9-hour or something documentary that's now stuck in limbo. What have you heard? And I assume you were interviewed for it and everything.
I just see what I read. If there's anyone saying anything, I think we need to revere him. I think we need to see these concerts. We need to see the Freak concert. We need to see the Met Center concert. There's so much unicorn stuff before we delve into his whole life. I hope the music comes out. That's what drives me. I just hope there's so much music for people to hear. Our lives are short. This generation is moving fast. It'll be generations for people to hear all this stuff that he did. And I would just like to, for all of us that really experienced him alive, I think we would love to hear. And I would love people to hear all the stuff that I got to hear.
There's so much in the vaults. What is the top stuff that you would like to be out that is not heard, that is not out?
Well, I think it'd be fun for people to hear that jam that I was talking about. There's like 8 songs officially. I think there's a version of it where Prince is actually talking to Andre and I and calling out cues, which is really amazing, where you can really see that we were just flying by the seat of our pants. You stop here, coming up, I turn around, here we go. You can see driving 100 miles an hour, how he worked, even when we were kids. Other stuff there's so much great stuff. Wendy and Lisa did a ton of stuff with him that I've heard that's great. The Rebels would be fun for people to hear, I think. The 83 concert, I think, is what we really need to get out there. It's the Holy Grail, where Purple Rain is recorded live. August 3rd, 1983. I think that would be great for people to see. That's Wendy's first show, but it really talks about all that magic we talked about earlier from the rehearsal space and transferring it to the stage. It shows you the transition from 1999 to the Purple Rain era. I want people to know about my friend. I want people to know about this guy, whether can documentaries or films or anything tell the story as great as the music and videos he made. I just hope we get to see more of it, because that's how we should remember him. That's how we need to remember him. It's just these amazing performances, his photography, his fashion, just the ability from all the decades. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I spent one day with him about a year before he passed, and I think about it all the time, a day at Paisley Park for what was supposed to be a cover story, but it didn't end up coming out till he died. And I truly think about it all the time.
If you're lucky enough to be in the room with him, it's a different life. It's a different alternative universe from the one that we're in. When you entered that space, you felt alive in a way that you hadn't ever felt before. Because this man gave an energy off, right? That was completely different than anyone you've ever met and will probably ever meet.
And that's our show. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, subscribe to Rolling Stone Music Now wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us 5 stars and a nice review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, because that's always appreciated. But as always, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week.